Welcome to this OECD's fourth roundtable on the circular economy in cities and regions. My name is Sujin Kim. I am the deputy head of the division in charge of cities and urban policies and sustainable development at the OECD. And I will have the pleasure of serving as your moderator for this first session out of 3 sessions that we will have over the next 3 hours, during which we will try to unpack how this shift from a linear economy to a circular economy directly in cities and regions where people and businesses are located can help us address not only the long-term transformations of our world, such as urbanization and climate change, for example, but also the more immediate consequences of massive global shocks, including additional waves of the COVID-19 pandemic, which are still unfolding in many parts of the world, and now the war raging in Ukraine. So we will hear more from our speakers on these challenges and opportunities of the circular economy in a minute. Before we dive into this very rich topic, let me just give you 2 quick points of housekeeping, which you are probably very familiar with by now. The first point is that we are recording this webinar, and we will make the recording available over the next few days on the webpage of the OECD program on the circular economy in cities and regions. So please do check out the link that will be shared with you in the chat. Then a second point of housekeeping is that we have more than 500 registered participants today, and many more people out there who will follow us on social media. So please do engage with us real time using the Q&A button that you have in Zoom down below. And please do spread the word also on Twitter out there using our handle, which is OECD_local. And of course, the hashtag circular economy. So now we are going to travel to a very interesting country and to hear about its journey towards the circular economy, because we are delighted to launch today our new OECD report on the circular economy in Ireland. This report was born out of a very close partnership between the OECD and Ireland over the past 2 years, and we are extremely privileged to have both organizations represented by very high-level leaders. So from the OECD, we have Deputy Secretary General Yoshiki Takeuchi, who is here with us. Thank you again, DSG. And from Ireland, Minister of State Ocean Smith, who is responsible for communications and the circular economy. Thank you so much, Minister, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. So I will first pass the floor to our Deputy Secretary General, Yoshiki Takeuchi. DSG, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Minister of State, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to open the 4th OECD Roundtable on the circular economy in cities and regions and launch a report on the circular economy in Ireland. This report comes at an important time. The war in Ukraine is a terrible humanitarian crisis. It is also a powerful global economic shock, putting strain on our economies and societies. Amid the uncertainty, we estimate the global economic growth could be more than 1 percentage point lower than this year than was projected before the conflict. Global inflation, which was already high at the start of the year, could rise by a further 2.5% due to the rising costs of energy and raw materials. These costs are pushing countries, cities, and businesses to make renewed efforts to promote efficiency in their use of resources, to save costs, but also to improve resilience. The issue of resource and material management is particularly relevant in Ireland, where the population is growing by 1% every year. 1%, this is twice as fast as the OECD average. Ireland is expected to gain additional 1 million people by 2040. This means that demand for energy saving, energy, housing, infrastructure, food, growth, and jobs will continue to rise quickly over the next 2 decades. Given this pressure, the circular economy holds great potential for Ireland. It can help conserve resources, reduce pollution, transform waste into a valuable input. Indeed, 5% increase in resource efficiency would save the Irish economy 2.3 billion euros every year. And in many ways, Ireland is moving in this direction. Let me just highlight some of the initiatives that we have identified in our report. Over the last 2 years, the Irish government has set up a waste action plan for circular economy and a whole of government circular economy strategy. It has also approved a landmark circular economy bill and a circular economy innovation grant scheme. Another example is the Environmental Protection Agency's National Waste Prevention Program, which has raised awareness and built know-how on waste among citizens and businesses. These new initiatives add to the environmental measures that were already in place, such as the levies on plastic bags that have reduced bag use by 98% between 2011 and 2018. Nevertheless, more can be done. Our report indicates how Government of Ireland can play a role as a promoter, facilitator, and enabler of circular economy. Allow me to highlight 3 recommendations in particular, which could be summarized as 3 S: scale, silos, and skills. First, in terms of scale, Ireland should leverage each phase's specific potential for the circular economy. For example, it can set up local repair workshops, reuse centers, circular innovation hubs, and demonstration projects that transform urban bio-waste into inputs for rural agriculture. Once created, scaling up these pilot projects is essential to making them part of business as usual. Second, the circular economy is about the economy, not just waste. It should transcend silos and become an integral part of different sectorial policies. To do so, the government could foster synergies between the circular economy strategy and the climate action plan, the national planning framework, the enterprise strategy, and the bioeconomic policy, to name a few. Third and last, the circular economy transition needs to draw on the right skills. Both national and local governments need to expand capacity building programs and develop new ones to address skill gaps. I would like to warmly thank the Minister for his leadership and commitment to the circular economy and for the excellent collaboration between the OECD and the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications of Ireland over the past 2 years on this project. And this has brought in this report. More than 100 stakeholders from the public, private and non-profit sectors across the country contributed to the dialogue. And they have all expressed their willingness to help implement the recommendation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the transition towards a circular economy is not just an environmental objective, but an economic one too. The example of Ireland shows that the circular economy is a shared responsibility across the levels of government and stakeholders, and it calls for a collective and cooperative and coordinated approach. I am confident that the experience of Ireland will be a source of inspiration for many OECD countries. The OECD stands ready to continue to support the Ireland in the implementation, assessment, and adjustment of its circular economy policy in the months and years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, for recalling the pressure coming from this highly uncertain global context. You spoke about the inflationary pressure, for example, the rising cost of energy and raw materials that are really accelerating this momentum for this transition towards better material efficiency. And we could see, through our report that Ireland is taking this path that you summarized in those 3 S's. So at the right scale, drawing on the right skills, and overcoming the silo approach. So it is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Ocean Smith, Minister of State for Communications and the Circular Economy in Ireland, to share his insights on this journey towards the circular economy in Ireland. Minister, I will hand you over the floor.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. And thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. That was a very interesting address and very clear and very relevant to what we're talking about today. It's a real pleasure to be here at the Roundtable discussing the circular economy, which is such an ambitious project. We're trying to do something that is no less than changing the basic principles, the basic assumptions that underlie how we run our world economy. And the fundamental principle that we're challenging is the assumption that the faster that we deplete our finite resources, the richer we become. So that's really what we're trying to overcome, is that idea that the faster we clear our cupboards, the wealthier we are. Of course, it's not true. And as Yoshiki Takeuchi said, what we need to do is to connect up the outputs from our manufacturing into the inputs of other parts of the economy, so that we are regarding our byproducts not as waste, but as resources. It's great to have people who are experts and also to have people from around the world. When we're doing something as cutting edge as the circular economy, we need people who are doing the research in academia, and we also need the international perspective, people who have carried out changes or policy initiatives in their countries that we can learn from. So I'm very privileged to be in this ministry, this cutting edge ministry, but I'm also aware that I need to listen carefully and learn from what's going on. And this kind of meeting where we meet at a webinar and we look at reports are important, but it's also important to physically connect with the people who are working in the circular economy. So every chance I get, I am visiting projects and social enterprises and profitable enterprises who are working in the circular economy sector, so that I can see firsthand what's happening, so I can gain a better understanding. It's been a real pleasure for Ireland to work with the OECD, and it's great to launch this report today and to have had that collaboration. The OECD really provides, I think, global leadership in policy research and development. And it allows people who are, as I said, people who are thinkers, but also people who are doers from around the world to connect and to improve people's quality of life, which is really the essence of politics, I suppose. If you're doing it right, are you going to give people a better quality of life? So, as Yoshiki mentioned, all of this is only made more important and made more urgent by global events in the Ukraine, where we can see that relying on complex supply chains, relying on fossil fuels and overseas depleting finite resources is not a very stable situation for the world economy. The publication of this report that we're launching today is the end of 2 years of collaboration between the OECD, between my department, and between many circular economy stakeholders. And it is something that happened all the way through the pandemic. I mean, it all happened during those 2 years, those very difficult 2 years, so that all of the engagements that happened were virtual. And the very first of those meetings was in March 2020, when COVID-19 was really beginning to be felt across Western Europe. So, I think it has been a very successful thing. And I think that there were over 100 different stakeholders who were allowed to contribute their perspective on circular economy in this virtual way. And for a small country on a topic that's really an emerging area of interest, I think that has been a very broad and large degree of engagement. And I'm very happy that we have this overlap clearly between the green transition and the digital transition. So the two things have helped each other. I think this is a good example. So today, I just want to briefly reflect upon the progress that we've made in advancing the circular economy in Ireland. The work that we did with the OECD really had an influence on developing national policy. So I want to thank you for that. The report that we're launching today, it urges us to promote a circular economy, and it sets out a collection of measures that we can take to make this happen. And certainly those measures, they have informed the national steps that we're taking now. In 2020, we published our first national policy position on the circular economy. That's the Waste Action Plan for a Circular Economy. And that was the bridge, the policy bridge between waste and circularity. So what was the department that looked after waste is now the Department for a Circular Economy. That report sets out the current path for the specific circular economy focused policy developments that we're now carrying out. And then in December of last year, we published our first whole of government circular economy strategy. And that sets out the high level steps that we need to take to make this transition possible. So of course, it's our first circular economy strategy, so it's a high level document. It aimed to communicate government's overall approach, but the new version that's coming out will be much more detailed and will have more ambitious and numeric targets. In the last few weeks, we moved to embed this policy into our national legislation. So I brought into our national parliament, the Oireachtas, a circular economy bill. And that's going to sets out a suite of regulatory and economic measures, which together are going to bring us towards this circular transition. What we're trying to do is we're trying to minimize waste. We are trying to decouple our economic growth from our resource consumption. And what we want to do is we want to retain the value of goods and materials in our economy for as long as possible. So that's why our commitment to a transition to circularity is embedded into our legislation. So that this circular economy bill that I've brought in, which I'm glad to report was welcomed by every party in opposition. And in fact, the opposition parties even welcomed each of the measures that are in the circular economy bill. And their only complaint was that they had other measures that they wanted to bring in addition. And as the law has not gone through all the different stages in our upper and lower houses, there is opportunity to amend it and to add in extra measures that people want to see. So what we're doing is we're putting our ideas about a circular economy onto a legal and statutory footing. We are giving a statutory basis for the Environmental Protection Agency's Circular Economy Programme, and this will give practical effects to policies that are set out in the strategy. So the Director General of the agency, Laura Burke, who I think is going to be speaking here today, she will no doubt tell us more about the detail about her important work in supporting the transition to circularity, and I'm going to be listening carefully to that. And by providing for the introduction of new environmental levies, and also by putting in incentives for businesses to segregate their waste, the bill is going to encourage changes in behaviour, not just for individuals, but also for companies, because it's important that the corporate sector plays its full role. Otherwise, it's seen as inequitable. So we're trying to get the circular economy to become a normal thing in people's everyday life. That the assumptions about how the economy works and the importance of looking after things and repairing things as opposed to creating new things is embedded into people's consciousness. And many people have pointed out, particularly older people, that these were the assumptions that our parents and grandparents' generation had already, and that many of those businesses that have died away, or those sectors that have shrunk, which are involved in upcycling and repair, I'm going to be very strongly promoting that those areas come back. So some of the key changes that we're making in the legislation include changing the way we do our end of waste and byproducts processes to make sure that we reuse more material. And we also want to see that we believe that's going to reduce costs for business as well, so it's going to make economic sense. And this is especially important in the construction sector. We're at a time where Ireland is suffering from a great shortage of housing, and there are programs in place to build 300,000 homes over a course of 10 years. We're spending €4 billion a year on that. So at such a critical point where there's a huge quantity of investment going into a particular sector, it's really important to get it right and to make sure that the demolition waste from old buildings is fed back in safely into the construction, and that we're not embedding large quantities of carbon in the materials that we choose for that construction. So we have this opportunity to get our construction sector right. This report that we have from the OECD today, it sets out very clearly how the government can play a role as a promoter and a facilitator of the circular economy. And so government has a role as regulator, as promoter, setting the environment. Business has a role, and then the individuals have a role. And those three things have to work together and have to be fairly divided. No one on its own can manage this transition. And the whole of government circular economy strategy sets out how we're going to work across the different departments of government, and also how we're going to link between national and local government to make sure that we're operating in a harmonious way. And the next version of the strategy, which is coming at the end of this year, is going to be much more specific. So think about very specific targets, very specific actions and priorities. And we're also developing a new national platform for the circular economy. That's going to happen this year, and it will bring together different stakeholders, and it will help to raise awareness across society, but it will also provide a forum for collaboration and knowledge building. I'm hoping to be able to showcase much of this work when Ireland co-hosts the Circular Economy Hotspot event in 2023. To facilitate the circular economy, a new interdepartmental working group will ensure policy coherence, but also that we integrate across government and that we're bringing alignment to national economic, environmental and social objectives. And this group will be supported and inspired by a parallel circular economy advisory group. And that group will draw from the considerable talent pool of circular economy activists in Ireland, ensuring that suitable prominence is given to change makers in design, standards and in research. So to enable the circular economy bill is going to start to reorientate our legislative framework from a mindset where we're looking at waste to a mindset where we are thinking about what we can do in a circular economy. In other words, looking at waste as a resource rather than as a problem to be dealt with. We're going to be providing a legal framework that's needed to help decision making for end of waste and byproducts, and that's going to be essential for construction. We're going to bring in incentivized pricing for waste collection. So in other words, we're going to require that businesses segregate their waste. They will have economic incentives to do so in the same way that our domestic sector already has. We're going to bring in levies on waste recovery and on disposable packaging items. And that is going to drive innovation in the sector, in the packaging sector. We're also going to bring in new environmental levies on single-use items. And then later on, we are going to actually ban those items when the time is right. So for example, we're starting with a levy on disposable hot drinks. So if you buy a coffee in a cafe and you choose to take a single-use disposable cardboard cup for your coffee, you're going to have to pay a levy to go with that. And that money will be put into a special circular economy fund. And that fund will be used to incentivize new circular economy innovations. So to change the, to allow for technologies that promote or enable a circular economy. And I know that we're going to be working with people like Circulara, the Irish Circular Manufacturing Platform, and also with the Rediscovery Centre, which is a national centre for circular economy in Ireland. So, to give you an idea of the waste that is in the hot drinks sector, I think that probably 30 years ago this didn't exist, but nowadays it's very common to go in, buy a hot drink, buy a coffee or a tea, and leave with that drink in your hand, and then throw the cup away. So we estimate that about 200 million of these cups are used in Ireland every year, and that's for the population of about 5 million people in Ireland. So 200 million cups a year is not a sustainable, it's not a sustainable behaviour. And when I speak to cafes, they tell me that it's costing them a lot of money as well. It costs them nearly 20 cents per cup. So if I put a 20-cent levy on each of these 200 million cups, and if there's no change in behavior, I'll be taking in 40 million euros a year in revenue. Of course, I very much expect that's not going to happen, and I expect that I will be aiming towards cutting the use of these single-use hot cups by a very large percentage. And eventually, my goal is not to raise revenue from this, but to actually eliminate the use of disposable cups altogether. So disposable cups, coffee cups, is just the first of the levies. Later on, I'll be putting levies, I expect, with when I've consulted with the sector on other things such as packaging for fast food, so cold drinks cups and so on. So the linear economy that we discussed at the start, this idea of a take, make, waste model, is it's economically unsustainable. And what we're trying to do is to retain the value of the goods and materials in our economy for as long as possible, and to reduce our risk exposure to complex global supply chains. And we've seen the effects of that in the form of high prices and inflation and disruptions in the ability to obtain goods and services recently. This OECD report, it gives us an ambitious and inspirational agenda for change, and it has been developed alongside our own evolving policies over the last 2 years. And while I believe that we are already making significant inroads in that agenda, there's just so much more to be done, and there are many exciting opportunities for us all to be realized. I think there will be big technological changes which will be inspired by the economic incentives that come about because of the way that we've changed our taxation. It's a time of great uncertainty right now and distress for many, and so it's important that we work to make our economy more circular and more sustainable to give us some protection. There's a saying in Irish, Nínearca Curla Chéile, which means that the unity is strength. We're stronger together. So we look forward to continuing our work together nationally and internationally to realise our shared ambition of a sustainable future for all. So thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, and thank you very much, Ariana, and to your team for your expertise and your insights and your professionalism in bringing this report out today. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion and to listening to the insights, because it's a time for learning for all of us, and particularly for me. And if you have any suggestions about a circular economy or any ideas you want to come back to me with, always feel free to contact my office. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister Smith, for sharing this extremely strong commitment and action to particularly embed this transition in your legislative and regulatory arsenal to put in place both incentives and sanctions, as you explained. I believe this is going to be a very inspirational approach for many people in our audience. So to all our audience, you can access the report either by scanning the QR code that should appear at some point on the slide on the screen, or by clicking on the link directly that will be also shared in the chat. We are now moving to the second part of this session on the circular economy in Ireland, because Minister Smith rightly mentioned that the report was the result of this 2-year dialogue among many different stakeholders engaged in circular economy, which really, require all hands on deck. So we are extremely excited to welcome in this panel discussion 4 key actors of the circular economy in Ireland. I have the pleasure of welcoming first Laura Burke. You are Director General of Ireland's Environmental Protection Agency, called the EPA. We have Sarah Miller, Chief Executive of the Rediscovery Centre that the Minister has just mentioned. We are also delighted to welcome Jim Conway, Director of the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly in Ireland. Welcome. And Anna Davis, Professor and Principal Investigator of in the Environmental Governance Research Group at Trinity College, Dublin. So as you can see, each of our panelists brings a very distinct perspective on the circular economy in Ireland from the national government, from the regional government, also a view from the private sector and universities. So we will hear from them about 5 minutes each, and I will unfortunately have to be a little bit strict on time because we are running slightly behind schedule. But I will now turn first to Laura. the Environmental Protection Agency has recently launched this circular economy program that we have heard about, and the EPA has been very active in preventing waste generation and advancing the transition towards this circular economy in Ireland. So I was wondering, in your view, what would be maybe the top 3 priorities that you would see for the circular transition in Ireland, and perhaps also what is the main challenge that you think we need to overcome to make this transition happen on the ground? In 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Just in 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here today at this event and the report. And as the Minister said, the EPA has an active circular economy programme, and in fact, back in 2004, we set up a waste prevention programme, and now this has moved on into circular economy. Moving straight on to the 3 challenges that I'd say people will kind of have a familiarity with, doesn't matter what country you're in. I would talk about the construction sector, also implementation of green public procurement, and last but not least, supporting the regulatory framework for circularity. So in Ireland, we have a very ambitious plan, a Housing for All strategy, which is looking at building 300,000 new homes. We have by 2030, we also have a national development plan, an enormous amount of investment, 4 billion euros per annum of public investment in construction. It's a sector that generates 15% of our waste, so it is a big impact sector. And the focus historically has really been on reducing waste generation and improving waste management practices, and that's still really important because there's around 8.8 million tonnes of waste generated in the sector. However, the OECD report rightly calls out the need to take this more holistic approach and not the end of pipe solution. So in order to bring about circular construction, it's critical, of course, to influence design, procurement at all stages through the process. So last year, as part of our circular economy programme, the EPA published best practice guidelines for the preparation of resource and waste management plans for C&D projects. So the focus for us now is to make sure these guidelines are embedded and implemented by the sector. And I do see that one of the recommendations was kind of mandatory, have these plans as mandatory, and we would absolutely be calling for this because there are only going to be a certain distance you can go with voluntary schemes. Now, green public procurement also plays a role in circularity in construction, which leads me on to the green public procurement. And this is something the EPA has been promoting for a long time, probably for around 10 years, but I think its time is right now. And around 12% of Ireland's GDP is through purchasing power from public procurement. We just published a document in the last couple of days, a report in the last couple of days on green public procurement by government departments in Ireland. And to be frank, it was extremely disappointing. That was for the year 2020. What we're seeing is there has not been an active take-up of green public procurement. What I would say is by now focusing on the issue and what gets measured gets done is really bringing this to the fore. And so we will be continuing to publish these reports, but also providing support and guidance for public bodies. And last but not least, on the regulatory framework, and as a regulatory body, we are responsible for making decisions on end of waste and byproducts. The Minister has highlighted the idea of streamlining this. We've already done this work. We'd be interested to know what others are doing. But in streamlining and in making it more efficient, we need to protect the environment. And that is an issue we've seen in Ireland before, where there have been significant impacts on the environment with the wrong types of materials being defined as end of waste and byproduct. So it is this balance of making sure it's efficient and it's effective and the right decision is made as quickly as possible. So last but not least, just going to move on to some of the challenges from my perspective. I think in Ireland, there's been a focus on recycling and recovery rather than repair and reuse. Again, the report has highlighted that. We're probably not alone in that, but I think it's something that we need to now focus on. There's also been an over-reliance on recovery. an over-reliance on incineration and heat generation in order to deliver on targets. That's not appropriate, and we need to focus on recycling. But what I'd say overall is that there needs to be an understanding of what the circular economy is. It's still considered quite an academic exercise and actually quite elitist in some ways if you talk to people. And it's seen that that's fine for people who are wealthy, can go and buy their local produce, which is more expensive, or don't have to worry about fast fashion because they can afford much more expensive clothes, etc. And we need to make it available for everybody and understood by everyone. So normalizing it, making the circular economy decisions easy and popular. So for example, whether it be secondhand clothes or things like that, that people buy into it. And I think there's a job for us all in that space. So Sue, I'm going to leave it at that, and there may be more of a discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for being so brief and for sharing, these very concrete examples, be it, reducing waste in the housing sector, for example, or the implementation of green public procurement, as you said, streamlining the regulatory framework in the right way, and overcoming those challenges, but also grasping, I guess, this low-hanging fruit as well. So thank you a lot. I'm now turning to Sarah Miller, Chief Executive of the Rediscovery Centre, which is, as we heard, Ireland's National Centre for the Circular Economy. And Sarah, you are, of course, very much involved in the circular economy policy with different levels of government, but you probably also know what businesses are doing on the ground. And as we were saying before, the transition towards the circular economy is not the job of one particular group of stakeholders or one level of government even. It's really everyone's business, and it requires all efforts and all hands on deck. And so I was curious to hear from you, in this respect, how do you think those different actors, be it from the public or the private sector, how could these different actors work together to implement some of the recommendations from the OECD that we've been discussing right now, and where do you see perhaps potential for further action in 5 minutes as well? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. And can you hear me okay there?
Yes, perfect.
Great, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in the discussion today. Congratulations to Oriana and the OECD team and everyone involved in the publication of the report. A key observation of this report is the narrow sectoral view of the circular economy being mainly focused on waste rather than effective resource management. So this observation to us highlights the need to change the narrative relating to the circular economy in Ireland. And to be honest, that's okay, because we know from recent studies carried out by the Rediscovery Centre that only 1 in 4 people in Ireland have heard of the circular economy. And actually only 5% will attempt to describe exactly what it is. So it's not only the perfect time to shift the narrative, it's vitally important that we actually do so, because we also know that a tentative understanding of the circular economy will actually inhibit support if we don't. We also know that public interest lies in what the circular economy can do for well-being, for quality of life, and for public health issues. So these social, economic impacts must be framed within climate-focused education and within public engagement initiatives. So my first priority area, I suppose, to support a circular transition relates primarily to education and public engagement. Integrating circularity into first, second, and third level education is really important to build awareness and to foster skills for the circular economy. It's a key element of our work here at the Centre, and we're delighted with the recent announcement that climate action and sustainable development will soon be a new subject on Ireland's Leaving Cert. Beyond the recognised education and training programmes, there is a need to raise awareness and increase citizen engagement and to build trust and support for a circular economy. The circular economy needs to be viewed as a driver of economic growth, job creation, social well-being and environmental protection. To support all these efforts, we heard about the ambition for a circular economy platform, which in our opinion can go way beyond a public engagement tool and enable collaboration and networking that is necessary to move beyond individual action and the siloed institutional programmes. And this will achieve cross-sectoral and societal transformation, which is very much needed. And that kind of brings me to my second point, which is all around collaboration. Recognizing that the circular economy requires an entire reshaping of the way that we work and the way that we live, we are going to need improved collaboration across all sectors. That's private, public, and the third sector. And yes, there's good momentum building at the moment, but it is still fragmented in terms of delivery. The report notes the positive efforts at policy level and points to the creation of the Interdepartmental Circular Economy Working Group. For the circular economy to move forward, it will be really, really important to see further coordination and alignment between the work of the department, the EPA, and local authorities. All three authorities have published significant circular economy policy and programs within the past year, and the coordination of these efforts will be critical to success. Outside of the policy drivers, we welcome the recognition of the role of organisations like the Rediscovery Centre in driving collaboration. It is one of our high-level organisational objectives, and strategic partners like the one that we have with the EPA enable us to act as transition brokers, stimulating community action and change and supporting the circular economy at a societal level. So beyond education and collaboration, my final point is around creating the environment for the circular economy to thrive. The report highlights a national focus on recycling and recovery over prevention, reuse and repair. And since this report was published, we now have the Circular Economy Bill approved by Cabinet. This demonstrates a further shift towards circularity, and the bill also provides a statutory basis for introducing incentives, like a target for reuse and repaired products. This is great, and it would be one of the first in Europe. However, for it to work, it will need to be supported by clear funding framework, and that is what we need. We need core funding and financial instruments to stimulate circularity. If you consider the operational subsidies provided for recycling through EPR schemes, there isn't anything similar to support higher level prevention, reuse and repair activities, and this needs to change. Alongside the financial incentives, we also need to see investment in sustainable infrastructure. We need to see a streamlining of planning processes and approvals to enable the timely delivery of necessary national projects and key initiatives relating to water, energy, transport and agriculture. The circular economy is about designing out waste, and that includes pollutants and inefficiencies. And without appropriate infrastructure to support this, we were always going to remain on the back foot. So in summary, my three priority areas to support circular transition are firstly, better education and public engagement, secondly, widespread collaboration, and finally, investment. And to underpin all of this work, we are going to need robust implementation plans and monitoring frameworks to ensure timely delivery of the circular economy to support much needed climate action. In relation to the one big challenge that we will need to overcome to make the circular economy a reality, I honestly think that we have to stop seeing the circular economy as a potential solution to the climate crisis and now realise that it is an absolute necessity. There's no value to be had in debating this any further. We know what we have to do. We must commit. We have to move forward and support the transition to a circular economy in every possible way that is available to us. And I will leave it there and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this very clear-cut overview of what you think are the three main challenges. And I'm glad also to see that they mirror pretty clearly those three S's that the DSG of the OECD outlined at the beginning. What you said about education, collaboration, and investment are really speaking to those three S's of skills, silos, and scale as well. So thank you so much. We will now zoom a little bit into, I guess, closer to the ground to hear a little bit about what's happening at the regional level. And so I will now invite Jim Conway, Director of the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly, because Jim, I guess part of your daily job is also to help coordinate and promote, the strategic planning and more sustainable development at the local and regional level. And so could you perhaps share with us, your ideas about the main priorities also to move towards this circular economy on the ground at the local level where people and businesses are operating, and also what you see as the main challenge in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to today's important conversation. I'm concentrating, as you say, on the regional dimension and also the European Union funding opportunities relating to Ireland's circular economy. For those of you who may not be very familiar with Irish regions, a very brief context. A recognition by government of the importance of Irish regions was made in 2014 through the establishment of 3 regional assemblies with statutory powers in the areas of spatial planning, economic development and EU funding. And regional spatial and economic strategies are the Assembly's principal policy tool enshrined in legislation. A transformative initiative by Irish government previously mentioned was Project Ireland 2040, which saw the coming together of the National Planning Framework and the National Development Plan, and the newly established assemblies were identified as central in assisting with achieving the objectives of Project Ireland 2040. In 2019, Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly made the regional spatial and economic strategy for the region with 3 pillars of climate action, economic opportunity and healthy placemaking. So you can see how these all come together. Circular economy is a cross-cutting theme across the strategy. The importance of strategy is further enforced by the statutory requirement that local authorities must ensure consistency with those strategies in the preparation of county and city development plans and local economic and community plans. And they collectively are the fundamental basis for all spatial, economic, social and cultural activities within those territories over a 6-year period. So all strategies are only as effective as the delivery of their objectives, and key to assessing that success is monitoring and evaluation, again mentioned previously. A regional monitoring tool has been developed for that purpose, and in the context of circular economy in Ireland, I believe regional assemblies can be active participants in assisting with developing an appropriate approach to ensuring the valuable work being carried out by many partners who are here today, that is integrated into relevant plans and monitored in a way that leads to change. Equally, the potential of the circular economy to support sustainable regions can be unlocked further, enabling technical capacity and know-how and providing governance and regulatory frameworks can help to achieve circularity in the key areas that hold core competencies for most policy areas underlying the circular economy: water, waste, built environment, land use or climate change. Climate challenges faced us are many, and responsibility for addressing these fall to numerous government departments, as again mentioned earlier, and state agencies, and also to us as individuals. Coordination of activities is key, and there are many approaches adopted by government over recent years. Regional assemblies have contributed to these efforts and work closely with local authorities, climate action regional offices, enterprise agencies, regional enterprise offices, the Office of the Planning Regulator and others to maximise the impacts and the best use of resources. The economic and enterprise opportunities that circular economy offers requires articulation in a way with which those seeking the guidance of statutory authorities in accessing funding can identify. A priority for regional assemblies is to ensure that appropriate funding available from the European Union, particularly in the areas of the EU Just Transition and the European Regional Development Fund, become available to those who can demonstrate that support for circular economy approaches is an integrated part of their project approach and proposal. Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly is a managing authority for the EU Just Transition Fund in Ireland and also plays a significant role in the management of the European Regional Development Fund. An enabling condition of the ERDF is the existence of a national specialisation strategy. And it could be that a similar condition in relation to circular economy can be considered by the EU in the preparation of future rounds after the current programming period. And finally, communications, as we've heard throughout the morning, are key, as is training. A constant theme on the agenda of assemblies led by our political leaders is the need for training across that constantly changing landscape of climate. And circular economy is strongly emerging as an area where this training and the availability of information is required. This is a challenge. We need to address this at the earliest possible time with all of our partners. So to allow for time for further debate, I'll leave it at that and look forward to our discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's pretty clear from what you said that the national, targets or the ambitions set at national level for this transition will not happen without this active mobilization of cities and regions on the ground. So that's a very important, local dimension here that you're underlining. I see that there are also several questions in the Q&A for our various panelists, and since time is running, and I'm not sure we will have time to actually, go through a second round of questions, I will invite also our panelists to engage directly and answer in the Q&A to those questions in the meantime. So last but not least, turning to the academia now, I will welcome Anna Davies. You are professor and principal investigator in the Environmental Governance Research Group at Trinity College Dublin, as we said. So welcome, Anna. Maybe you can tell us, how you see the role of universities like yours and knowledge institutions more broadly. How can those knowledge institutions help national and local governments in this transition from a linear to a circular economy and help overcome some of the challenges that have been discussed so far? Anna, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel today. It's been really interesting. I mean, the OECD report on the circular economy developments in Ireland comes at such a crucial time as the IPCC reports raise increasingly loud alarm bells about the need to change the way that we live in order to create a sustainable future. And my colleagues here on the panel today have all raised important points, and it's interesting to see where there are commonalities and differences as we bring different perspectives and remits to the table. In terms of my three priorities for kind of action here, I think that my first aligns very much with that of Minister Smith and Sarah Miller there, to ensure that the circular economy plans and policies move beyond waste and beyond efficiency. The waste management in Ireland has been transformed over the past 20 years, supported by investment in infrastructures to transition away from landfill, supported by clear targets. So I was very pleased to hear that the bill will drill down into these. I think that's essential. And massive strides have been made in the waste arena, but progress is slowing. And while circular economy initiatives are helping to revalorize waste from existing processes, making activities more efficient, such actions alone will not transform the system that's needed. Circular economy policies are needed to transform the linear economy, not just support these kind of eddies of circularity around the end of stream wastes of an unsustainable system. So we need really to address fundamental matters of consumption and its regulation, and that needs to be acknowledged and addressed. We need absolute decoupling of emissions from production. Efficiency savings alone will be insufficient if growth continues unchecked. And in some ways that leads to my second priority, which is the necessity to include social and equity considerations in circular economy strategies. And this needs to go far beyond incentives for behavioural change, certificates or labelling or nudging, which are stuck in this kind of information deficit model of consumption, that we only need to provide the right information and people will do the right things. The OECD report notes how innovative grassroots activities have been in Ireland, and I agree, but it must be recognised that this has often been with few supports and precarious budgets that change from year to year in focus and value. So I was interested to read, for example, that the OECD report findings that short value chain food landscapes in Ireland are judged to be well established through community supported agriculture schemes and neighbourhood food distribution networks. Now, that's really not my experience of the landscape, and it raises so many questions. So where is the data that underpins these readings of the landscape, and what proportion of food in Ireland is captured in them? What difference does such activity make to food security and food waste reduction, and how exactly are these activities being supported and expanded? There are major data gaps that need filling, and this leads on to my final priority area, which of course is related to research, innovation, monitoring and evaluation. We need really to expand and coordinate support for research and innovation, monitoring and evaluation that supports more transformative change. Currently, research funding is limited in terms of blue skies research, transformative ideas, creative, imaginative ideas about addressing this really significant issue that we're facing. Major funding bodies either require industry match funding to leverage research funds, keeping research within the already existing horizons really of business, or focus on win-wins for the economy and environment, but not necessarily for society. So support for social innovations in particular is limited, and innovations that are ahead of the market or of regulatory demands fail to generate investment, even if stakeholders see value in them. So circular activities that support social goals are urgently needed, and they urgently need stronger support from policies and laws, as they need to compete in the linear economy before they can transform it. There's a need for a coherent and transdisciplinary research agenda on the circular economy in order to support the policy process. And this needs to be inclusive and looking beyond Ireland's borders, and transparent in the sense of being accountable for its achievements and shortcomings, not least when it comes to economic, social and environmental changes. So to conclude, while we're all in dire need of positive good news stories, and I for one am hopeful about moving towards a more sustainable society in Ireland and beyond, it's important to be wary of presenting the circular economy as a panacea offering entirely conflict-free solutions and strategies. The challenges of leaving the linear economy must not be ignored, and the limits of the current articulations of a circular economy should be clearly stated. The circular economy is not a synonym for sustainability. Wider sustainability concerns around gender equality, for example, are lacking, and data underpinning impacts of current circular economy actions is limited. So as the OECD report concludes, Ireland has significant scope for progress, and I look forward to Ireland moving urgently from plans to implementation, action and evaluation. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this very clear, I guess, word for the end, and particularly for pointing out, I suppose, this need to combine, social equity considerations with the transition to the circular economy, and also for the constant need to innovate and to track our progress and to monitor and evaluate the outcomes of this journey. So thank you so much. I think there has been a very clear consensus also around the table among our panelists around, those remaining challenges, but also the opportunities, and how the example of Ireland is also talking to I guess the other OECD countries and beyond who are represented here in this virtual roundtable. I think this will bring us to the end of today's first session on the circular economy in Ireland. I know the conversation will perhaps continue in the Q&A, because there are still a few questions for different speakers. So you can find our OECD report in the OECDI library through the link that will be shared in the Zoom chat now. And I would like to thank again warmly our partners in Ireland for this excellent collaboration over the past 2 years of intense work and dialogue. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the OECD team, and particularly Oriana and Juliet for their excellent work on this report. So congratulations to all. Thank you all for your inputs to this first session. And we will now move to the second session of this roundtable, which will focus on measuring the progress on circular economy in cities and regions. And for that second session, I will hand over the moderation mic to my colleague Oriana Romano, who is the head of the Water Governance and Circular Economy Unit at the OECD. Oriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sujin, and thanks again to all the panelists of the previous session. We are very proud today to launch the report on the circular economy in Ireland, and we have also much more to share now during the next 2 hours. So please stay with us. And again, I invite you to ask any questions you may have through the Q&A function. We will try to respond in written if there is not enough time to respond to you live during the discussion. So thank you very much again, Sujin, for your excellent moderation. And we're now moving towards the second session on measuring circular economy progress in cities and regions. I'm very happy to welcome our speakers of this first part of the session, José Chanson, She is the Director of the Economic Development at the City of Montreal in Canada. And Juliette Lassman, she is a policy analyst within our unit on water governance and circular economy. She has been very much involved not only in the circular economy in Ireland report, but also in this work that we have been carried out with the City of Montreal during the last year and a half. So without further ado, I would like to invite Juliette to provide us with an overview of the OECD scoreboard on the governance of the circular economy. How do we measure that, and what was the aim and the scope of our work with Montreal? Juliette, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oriana, and I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about the results of the first application of the OECD scoreboard on the governance of the circular economy in cities and regions in the City of Montreal in Canada. Next slide, please. So why is there a shift towards the circular economy in Montreal, and why the collaboration with the OECD? Well, the City of Montreal had three main objectives. The first is to rethink production and consumption models to consume less resources and also to protect the ecosystems that generate them. The second driver for the circular economy in Montreal is to optimize the use of resources that are already in circulation in the economy by using products more frequently, but also extending their useful life and giving a second life to resources that are already in circulation. And finally, the third driver is to create opportunities for the economy, so in terms of growth, but also in terms of job and innovation. Next slide, please. And so in this context, the City of Montreal and the province of Quebec, so a very interesting case, we have both the city and the state government decided to collaborate with the OECD to do three main things. The first is to have an overview, an understanding of what the state of play is of the circular transition in the city based on the 12 governance indicators of the OECD scoreboard. The second is to identify barriers and the first steps for the development and implementation of the city's circular economy roadmap. And finally, the city really wanted to kickstart a dialogue with stakeholders with a view to building a consensus among them on the main challenges, but also the way forwards for the circular economy. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see that the OECD approach to the circular economy recognizes that the circular transition requires getting the governance right. And so to support governments in getting the governance right, the OECD has developed several tools, including the checklist for action that you can see here. So what is exactly this checklist for action? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. So it's a list of must-dos for governments who want to foster the circular transition, and it's based on the 12 governance dimensions that you can see here on your screen. And these dimensions should support decision makers in promoting, facilitating, and enabling the transition to a circular economy. These dimensions cover most things from the very basics. So it starts with establishing clear roles and responsibilities, and it moves all the way through the spectrum to the most sophisticated governance dimensions. So moving towards the regulation, the financing, and data and assessment mechanisms. Another tool, next slide, please. Another tool that the OECD has developed is the OECD scoreboard on the governance of the circular economy in cities and regions. And this really builds on the checklist for action that I've just shown you, and it acts as a companion for that checklist for action. This scoreboard, what it is a tool for self-assessment, or a tool for assessment for governments to evaluate how they're doing in their circular economy transition. And the way it works is through a traffic light system. As you can see on your screen, we have different colors coming up. In green, we have initiatives that are very much in place, whereas when we move towards the red, it's more initiatives that are planned. And who evaluates the governance of the circular economy in cities and regions? This is really for the cities to decide, but generally it's a multi-stakeholder group gathering citizens, businesses, academia, and so on. The OECD scoreboard has not been created just by the OECD, but actually it's a co-production with the first cities that took part in the OECD case studies on the circular economy in cities and regions. These are the cities of Umeå, Valladolid and Groningen. But Montreal, I have to highlight, has been actually the first city to use the OECD scoreboard as a pilot and to assess the state of play of its circular transition with relevant stakeholders. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see how this works in practice. The 5 main steps for the method in terms of the methodology are first and foremost to identify the lead team, so who is going to lead the exercise from the point of view of the city. Once the team has been identified, the team should then set the objectives and the scope of the assessment to really define what is expected from the process. The city then goes on to map stakeholders to identify the public sector, the private sector, but also the non-profit sector actors that should have a say in the assessment. As a 4th step, the city and the OECD then organise a targeted workshop for speakers and analyse the results and then perhaps repeat it once a year if possible. And if we move on to the next slide, we see that in the case of Montreal, this was very much followed, and this was very much the case. The lead team, there were actually 2 lead teams, one from the city of Montreal and one from the government of Quebec, so the city and the federal, the state level. And these teams set 3 main objectives for the assessment. The first was to promote collective thinking and to share knowledge between the stakeholders, but also to share information and overcome asymmetries of information between the different actors. And finally, to identify common policy gaps and a way forward to overcome them. As a next step, the lead team mapped the stakeholders and identified several different stakeholders to be included in the process. And I have to underline here that Montreal was very bold in this process because it didn't just engage with the usual suspects, and it really opened its black box to a range of different stakeholders. In the case of Montreal, we decided to organise the workshop over 3 days, from the 8th to the 10th of September. And why did we decide to organise it over 3 days? To have 1 day each for the promoter, the facilitator and the enabler pillar. The assessment, it must be underlined, is subjective. So each stakeholder evaluates and votes on what his or her perception is, but it's very much fact-based. So before assessing the city the lead team presented their main initiatives for each of the indicators. And once they had been presented with the initiatives, then stakeholders were able to vote. And this is why the update every year, so to repeat the self-assessment process, is so important. It's really to measure progress and to see if the city's initiatives and strategies are actually working and if they're perceived as such by the stakeholders. So the aim of the workshop is not to create data, but to stimulate a dialogue, to raise awareness, to analyse the policy gaps and to build consensus on the ways forward. And in the case of Montreal, the stakeholders, not the OECD, were the ones providing the solutions. And if we move on to the final slide now, you can see the results. Sorry, yes, before, thank you. You can see the results of the stakeholders and the city. In red, the city, and in yellow, the stakeholders. So looking at this graph, we can see that the city and the stakeholders pretty much agree on the level of implementation for half of the indicators, including, for example, awareness and transparency. But there are 2 indicators where the city and the stakeholder have a quite wide difference of opinion, and that is on roles and responsibilities and on financing. And these differences in perception highlight the need to do 2 main things. The first is really to strengthen and diversify the city's communication on its circular economy initiatives, whether they're ongoing or planned, with a wide range of stakeholders. And the second is to really strengthen stakeholder engagement beyond this simple communication and beyond the conventional sectors involved in the circular economy roadmap, which, as I mentioned, Montreal is already doing very well. And I'll stop here now because the City of Montreal will tell you much more about this, but I'll just say that we very much look forward to continuing the conversation with Montreal, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Juliette, for this great presentation, your hard work, as well as let me just acknowledge also the work that has been carried out during this last year and a half by Melissa Kerim-Dikeni.
Sorry, Rihanna, you're on mute.
I'm not on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? So I was just acknowledging the work that has been done by the local team, Juliette, and also Melissa Kerim-Dikeni as a previous staff of the former staff of the OECD unit on water governance and circular economy. We will now pass the floor to José Chasson. José, are you connected? Can you hear me?
Yes. Bonjour, you hear me?
No, I don't think we can hear you very well. Maybe we can try to fix your mic. José is the Director of Economic Development from the City of Montreal. She has been very much involved in this work, and she will tell us more in detail what were the results on of this assessment through the OECD scoreboard on the governance of the circular economy, and what would be the next steps towards the strategy that the City of Montreal will be undertaken by the end of 2023. So let's see if we can hear you. José, can you hear me?
Bonjour, est-ce que là c'est mieux?
Yes, it's very well. So please go ahead. We can share your presentation. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. I'm very happy to be here also today with you to share some Montreal perspective on circular economy and also to talk about our collaboration with the OECD program. So first, let me thank Ariana, Melissa from the OECD team. We are really glad to be working with you on this project, and also with Carolina from the Government of Quebec. As Juliette said, we are all working very closely also with the provincial government on this project. So the work we did with OECD helped us, the city and our team, to evaluate the strengths, the weaknesses, and also the opportunities of the City of Montreal for the deployment of circular economy in our territory. So if we go to the next slide, Montreal, just like many other jurisdictions, we are actually having a lot of objectives towards carbon neutrality by 2050. So basically, just like you see all the plan that we do have under the at the bottom of the slide, these strategic plans that we have within the city are all aligned towards these corporate objectives. So this is a very strong signal also to have all the business unit at the city working towards the same direction. So if we go to the next slide, so we're going to talk a little bit about circular economy. For us, it's of course an effective way to reach our environmental and also economics goals. So in Montreal, it's the economic department that is actually driving the circular economy roadmap. Of course, we work closely with the environmental and procurement departments and also the urban and mobility departments. This is a strong signal that the business community is ready and is looking for. I think that's also something that we noticed during our works. And also the pandemic has highlighted supply issues in particular. We have a wonderful opportunity to transform our economy through local production and also especially with the material that are already in circulation. So this is also, so we're, in addition to the environmental value of a circular economy, we also see the circular economy can add a lot to our GDP. For example, in Montreal, the food waste only is estimated at 3.4 billion. According to various sources, we could approximately 1.1 billion of this waste could be avoided. So this is a lot. So if we go to the next slide. So the City of Montreal, we have expressed a clear desire to act and to promote circular economy within the city. And that's why we have been working with the OECD to analyze our governance framework and thus better understand our strength and opportunity for improvement. So we are targeting to launch our first circular economy roadmap in 2023. So this will reinforce the multitude of action that are already underway, while we will be providing new tools, setting clear objectives also for ourselves, and providing means for our ambitions. So basically, the community expectation for Circular Montreal is that the city is to lead by example. They are also expecting that we support the ecosystem, and that we revise our regulation and frameworks, and also to promote consultation and collaboration between the stakeholders, and also to promote innovation and experimentation. So if we go to the next slide, so now with the collaboration, we highlighted some action that Montreal is doing. So as mentioned, through our Montreal 2030 strategic plan, the city has committed its entire administration to embedding the circular economy in its action and plans and programs. So we have already started the work. So we can think of our new responsible procurement strategy, which includes circular economy criteria in our purchases. So this is just a few months ago, we did that change. So while we are doing a few things, but there's also the work that we did with the OECD, actually revealed that the city administration faces some challenges to effectively communicate the action and vision of circular economy, as Juliette also mentioned. So we need to have tools, performance indicator, and a solid communication plan have to be put in place if we want to go further. Also, the work showed us that the role was the one that that role particularly was the one that the city has to work the most to be able to truly accelerate the development of circular economy. Although we have made great progress lately, we just recently launched the MontrealCircular.org platform this winter. This is actually a website that puts together the community, resources, events, and best practices in circular economy. Also, with the work that we did with OECD, we decided to go on with several studies to improve our role as a promoter. We're actually right now conducting a study on urban metabolism with circular economy. We're also mapping the circular economy initiative in our territory. We have more than 1,000. So this is some examples. So for us, the launch of the roadmap and more substantial communication activities seems really necessary in order to play our role to its full potential. So if we go to the next slide. Also, we are aiming to facilitate connection and dialogue and provide tangible and intangible infrastructure for new circular businesses, in particular through the establishment of effective multi-level governance. So as we mentioned, we work with the government of Quebec. We're working with all the business units at the city. So it's very important to keep on this coordination. So we have more impact altogether towards the same objective. So if we go to the next slide, we also work closely to support the ecosystem in the transformation of the city. So we need to work on our regulation. So we already adopted several regulation that is actually promoting the circular economy, especially in the plastic and also energy area. So, but it's only the beginning. We are currently conducting a study to identify the best regulatory lever to put in place in order to increase. We also work for the financing tools. So this is very important. We are collaborating with the private sector also on that. We did launch the first circular economy fund in Canada with a capitalization of 30 million. So, but we need to go further, have new program to facilitate, to finance innovation and new projects. And all the data also was very important. So the participant recommend that the city collects more data and also to share these data. That will help a lot to increase the circular economy. If we go to the next slide, so I will conclude on that because the time ran really fast. So working with OECD has allowed us to stop and analyze our progress towards the circular economy in a different way that the perspective that we were looking at was more on the priority sector. So the governance, the dimension of government is very interesting because we do realize now that we had to increase our communication, our consultation and mobilization efforts. Also, we have to strengthen our support to the ecosystem and stimulate innovation, and also increase the data generation and sharing. So it's very appreciate the work that we did. And also I would like in closing to say that we are looking forward to continue our work with OECD to accelerate the deployment. I think we have common interests such as the contribution of the social economy and the circular economy. Circular economy, so which will, I think, allow us to progress faster. So thank you very much for listening. So I will pass to you back, Ariana.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, José, Natasha, Valérie, the whole team for this great presentation, great work. It was a pleasure to work with you. And this, as you said, it's just the beginning. We managed to do this in a few days of workshop, engaging with more than 100 stakeholders. And we look very much forward to continue with more in-depth analysis and recommendations, also building on the experience of other cities, so to foster this city-to-city learning. And the OECD Roundtable on the circular economy in cities and regions is also one of the platforms through which we try to foster this mutual learning. And so thank you very much for sharing your experience and for sharing your next very ambitious plan that, as you said, there will be very much integrated into the ambition of many stakeholders, so from the business sectors to the citizens that have already contributed a lot to this very first step of our collaboration. And now, talking about inclusion, integration, and stakeholders, we would really like to hear from you through questions that we prepared for you. So using the Zoom poll. The question that should appear on the screen right now is what are the governance dimensions that you would wish to measure in terms of progress to improve decision-making on the circular economy? Would you like to measure progress and have an understanding of the strategic vision, awareness and transparency, policy coherence, stakeholder engagement, appropriate scale, regulation, financing, capacity building, innovation, and data and assessment? Of course, these are only a few of the governance dimensions that would be very much needed towards a transition from a linear to a circular economy, but let's have your view on this. So let's allow a few more seconds for you to respond. I see that stakeholder engagement and data assessment are those dimensions that seem to prevail compared to the others. And there is also a good percentage of you that are voting towards having a better understanding of financing, regulation, policy coherence, strategic vision. So I would close the chat. I would close this poll in the next 3 seconds. So 57% of participants have voted already. So we can close now. And we see that basically there is between data and assessment and stakeholder engagement, but also policy, not regulation before policy coherence, are the dimensions that have been highlighted from you as a participant of this roundtable as the key dimension that you would wish to measure to improve decision making. So this leads me to our next session, our next panelist, basically the second part of this session where we will hear from a different perspective, the perspective from Australia. So I'm very happy to have with us Hans Schandl. He is the chair of a metrics working group of the Australian Circular Economy Hub and member and expert of the United Nations International Resource Panel. And we have Sarah O'Carroll. She's the city lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation with a lot of experience, and not only with city government, but also in terms of measuring and connecting cities and businesses towards a better understanding of the implication of the circular economy and its impact from an economic, environmental, and social point of view. Welcome, both of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I will now pass the floor to Hans. Hans, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello, Oriana.
Great.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. So in 2022, very recently, the Australian Circular Economy Hub launched a study titled Measuring the Circular Economy, an Australian Perspective. From the OECD side, myself and Andres Aguirre were very proud to contribute from a very minimum part, I would say, but we had a very engaging conversation with the whole team on how to improve measurement, as it is something that is very interesting at different levels of government, very much needed, but still a great challenge. So we would like to hear from you of what is the state of the art of measuring the circular economy in Australia, what were the main reasons driving this kind of study and the finding, but also please tell us also about the challenges and how you think they could be overcome at national but also at local level. The floor is yours, Hans.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I represent the Australian National Science Agency, the CSIRO. I'm very pleased to be here. Perhaps we can go to the first slide. Or next slide. When you think about the Australian economy, and very often when we talk about the circular economy, we are looking at a material flow accounting approach. And when you think about the economy in Australia, you can clearly see it's an exceptional example of an economy that operates at the front and the back end of the global supply chains. We are extracting 2.3 billion tons of materials a year, of which we export 60% directly. When you ask what is actually the recycling rate in Australia, people will tell you 40%. But as soon as you put it into the material flow balance, you can see that the recycling rate of the about 1 billion tons of materials that we manage in our economy, only 8% get recycled. When you ask a different question and you're interested in how much of the processed material, the material we manage, is actually kept in circulation, we drop the circularity rate to 3.5%. So this is extremely low. And you could do another calculation and ask if we would employ all the technical potential that we have in the Australian economy, where could we get to? And our circularity potential in the current economic structure sits at about 20%. That shows you how fundamental a change we're looking at for an economy which has a very large extractive resource sector, is a resource exporter. In fact, Australia is the largest resource exporter in absolute values globally, and very wealthy urban consumers. So the change process we would need to undergo is tremendous. Let's go to the next slide. I would like to highlight for you two policy initiatives that can actually work together and create an alignment of environmental and economic policy in the Australian context. One is the waste policy and the action plan, which has 7 national waste reduction targets, which are enabled through the circular economy. That's what the plan states. And this goes hand in hand with the government initiative for recycling and clean energy, which is seen as a revitalization of the Australian manufacturing sector. Circular economy is really important at the state level. A number of states have circular economy strategies for a few years now. But importantly, the mechanism of city deals, which brings together 3 levels of government to align on issues of livability and sustainability in cities, increasingly looks at circular economy. Another good example are special activation precincts, such as in New South Wales, where the New South Wales government looks at advanced manufacturing, especially for renewable energy and resource recovery. Let's go to the next slide. So this is just a set of recent strategies that I encourage you to have a look at if you're interested. So for example, the South Australian waste strategy is now very much framed around circular economy. And also you see here the roadmap of the recycling and clean energy priority of the National Manufacturing Initiative. Let's go to the next slide. I just want to highlight a number of science initiatives, because in a way, you need scientific evidence for being able to transition to a circular economy. Australia has a national environmental science program, and for the first time, one of the focal areas are about sustainable communities and waste. And one of the things we're doing in this hub, looking at sustainable communities and waste, is to engage with metrics, data, and indicators to understand how big is actually the issue or the opportunity for a circular economy. And it's assumed to be in the trillions of dollars to 2040. CSIRO also has an ending plastics waste mission. And in each of those circumstances, I give you a link here if you want to engage further. Measurement is also a key issue for plastics waste. And it's actually very complicated to properly measure plastic and the way how it flows through the economy. The Australian Circular Economy Hub recently released a report, Oriana, that you introduced at the beginning of this section. So in that report, we were trying to establish the underpinnings of a metric system for an Australian circular economy. And I think the next step is to go into a true circularity report, which does not just have headline indicators, but also the level of detail that allows you to align the economic accounts with the environmental, the physical accounts, and to identify those areas which are actually the priorities or the hotspots for improving the circularity of the Australian economy. So in summary, I'd like to say, from the perspective of our economic structure, we are dealing with a significant problem and a very large opportunity in Australia to actually improve our circularity, but we are at the starting line. And metrics and measurement will be very important. And so the metrics working group of the Australian Circular Economy Hub, which I chair, which has scientific experts and members of all state governments and of the federal government in it, is actually an element to make this happen. So that's all I wanted to share with you, and thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hans, for this enlightening presentation. We are receiving lots of requests on whether the presentations will be available. I would say yes, on the OECD webpage of the program on the circular economy in cities and regions, along with the recordings of this roundtable. The point that you made are key for moving towards measurement on the circular economy, not only from, as it is often the case, from a waste perspective, but we also look into a material flow perspective and having an understanding on how resources can actually be used more effectively and efficiently in the future. And this, of course, requires a larger collaboration as the one that you put together within the Australian Circular Economy Hub. So we shared the link of the report that we mentioned, but of course, given that the presentation will be available, all the links that you share in your PowerPoint will be also available to the attendees of the roundtable. Thank you very much again. Please stay with us. Now I will pass the floor to Sarah. Sarah, thank you very much for coming back to the roundtable. It is a pleasure to have you here. As a city lead from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you had to deal with several cities, but also, as I mentioned, the connection to the business sectors. So what are the priorities for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in terms of measurement? What do you suggest to cities in order to move forward into this very challenging but also needed issue?
Thank you so much, Ariana. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of such an interesting discussion today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here again. I'd say from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation perspective, what we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, which I think is being highlighted very clearly today, that there's definitely a lot more being spoken about in terms of measurement or monitoring and evaluation compared to what we've seen in previous years. So it's definitely rising up the agenda, and more stakeholders are talking about it, both from the public and private sectors. I'd say that the private sector is definitely ahead of the public sector in terms of figuring out what measuring progress looks like for the circular economy. There are multiple methodologies and frameworks for quantitative measurement, so numbers and data-based measurement, for the circular economy that already exists, such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's Circular Transition Indicators and Framework, and Circularity, which was developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And even at the sector level, we have things like the Global Commitment that's focused on plastic packaging, that's led by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in collaboration with the UN Environment Programme. And I think it's really important that we gain an understanding of how circular the private sector is at all scales. So multinational companies, large, medium, and small companies as well, and across all sectors and across regions, because the opportunities and challenges are different depending on the size of the business, the sector that they operate in, and where in the world their supply chain is based. But as you say, it's also really important that we gain an understanding of how circular our cities and regions are, because they are the front line of the transition. They're where businesses of all sizes and sectors come together, and because local governments have this critical role to play to enable the circular economy transition at the ground level. I'd say there are probably 3 main challenges that we identify relating to measurement at the local government level. The first is deciding what data, metrics, and indicators to measure in the first place. So how do you measure waste and pollution being eliminated, products and materials being kept in use at their highest value, and natural systems in and around cities being regenerated? It's a long indicator list. There's also a lack of good quality data that can be used for measurement. Depending on where you are in the world, the existing public data sets might be reliable, or they might be really poor estimates of the reality. And there's also a really large resourcing requirement needed to produce a good quality quantitative baseline. And that's because so much of the data that exists is scattered across sources, so internally within government or owned by others, because of, as I said earlier, it's not always reliable. And if we're honest, it's because most are doing this measurement exercise for the first time as well. So there's a lot of learning, first-time learning that needs to take place as well. And I'd say that's where the OECD scoreboard is so useful, because although it's qualitative, so it's interpretation-based and not numbers-based, it still gives local governments somewhere to start in terms of measuring their progress. And it's built around this idea that local governments have a critical role to play to support the circular economy transition. ICLEI Europe's Circular Cities Declaration requires its signatories to report on their progress each year, and they use a qualitative framework as well that's based on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Urban Policy Levers framework. And if you look at the OECD scoreboard and Urban Policy Levers framework next to one another, you'd see that they're actually quite similar in many respects. So it's important to start somewhere, and that's where qualitative frameworks like the OECD's and ICLEI Circular Cities Declaration are so helpful, because they're a starting point. The resourcing requirement is far less. And as I think you can see from the case of Montreal that's already been shared earlier, that qualitative information can provide a wealth of information for spotting opportunities, identifying challenges, and for decision-making. But ultimately, it is really important that we move towards circular economy measurement frameworks for cities and regions that have a mix of qualitative and quantitative data points. So I'd suggest that cities and regions start with measuring their progress using a qualitative framework, something that's interpretation-based, and at the same time that they add a work stream that aims to identify the data metrics and indicators that are numbers-based, that can be used to measure the extent to which waste and pollution is being eliminated, products and materials are being kept in use at their highest value, and natural systems in and around cities are being regenerated. That you identify where this data exists for the indicators, data and metrics that you've chosen, and who owns that data, which departments or external organizations, and how you're going to collect that data and how often. So I'll stop there because of time, but if we do have time for questions, happy to answer anything further.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. You made a very important point on the need of combining qualitative and quantitative indicators. This is what we believe as well at the OECD, and for this reason we created this supporting tool for cities and regions, but also national government that would like to have an understanding of the existence and level of implementation of 12 governance dimensions that are linked to the checklist for action towards a circular economy, as Juliette described. But we also, to complement this work that is more qualitative, that would allow for defining and capturing the perception of different stakeholders. So we also created an inventory of more than 400 indicators of the different sectors that are now part of the circular economy concept. So we mentioned throughout the day the building sector, the food sector, transport, waste, water, energy, and so on. And through this inventory, we really combine what is available nowadays in terms of how the circular economy is measured. Of course, this doesn't respond to all the questions that you rightly raised. There is still a lot to do, and framework should improve, but also towards a better understanding of what the circular economy is and what kind of impact it can actually produce on the economy, on society, and of course on the environment. And in order to have a better understanding of where do we go from now, I'm very delighted to welcome Professor Tima Bansal. Tima is a professor and Canada Research Chair of Business Sustainability at the Ivey Business School at the Western University in London, Canada. Professor Gonzalo was the chair of the expert panel of the Canadian Council of Academies, a Circular Economy in 2021 in Canada. So I'm very happy to pass the floor to Tima, and we ask her to discuss a little bit, to tell us what is her thinking about the discussion that we just had on measuring the circular economy and how we can build the path for the future of measurement. So Tima, welcome and thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Oriana, thank you very much for this opportunity and also that lovely introduction. As Oriana said, that I was the chair of the expert panel, the CCA's expert panel on the circular economy. I just want to step back and tell you a little bit about what that is. The Council of Canadian Academies, which is the CCA, aims to identify or build the best evidence on a certain topic. And the topic is often defined by the federal government. And so what we were charged to do as a panel of academics, NGOs, and people from practice is identifying the challenges and opportunities for Canada in the circular economy. And not surprisingly, there hasn't been a lot of evidence in this space. And so it has been very difficult. And yet we were still able to generate a report, and then going old school here, but this is a report called The Turning Point, 178 pages of evidence. So if you ever want to get a good baseline on the circular economy, I think this is a really good place to start. Canada is a very unique spot in the circular economy, and one, because of its size. And I really enjoyed listening to Heinz's presentation about Australia, because they have very, very similar characteristics. Small population, large size, that makes circularity really difficult. Plus, we have 3 jurisdictions of government. So we have the federal government, we have the provincial government, we have local governments. We also have regions that are governed by Indigenous people as well. So that level of complexity makes it difficult to move materials across jurisdictions, and partly because different governments regulate different materials. And so it's been just a mishmash of challenges there. As with Australia, we also have a very heavy natural resource sector. And the difficulty with the natural resource sector is that we have lock-in, and we have this belief that we need to extract in order to elevate our GDP. And then that means that we don't want to let go of that and enter circularity, but it also means that natural resources are super cheap here. And that makes it, once again, hard for us to move to circularity. And then we also are integrated very deeply. So the US, as you can imagine, the population in Canada is at the southern part of Canada, which means that our supply chains go north-south, and that creates problems. So what do we recommend then as an expert panel? And we do not make recommendations, but we do identify opportunities for circularity. So one thing that we've said is that it's really important for collaboration, innovation, and better data. And that really fits with what the previous speakers said. And so I'm going to speak most to better data. Why do we need better data? There's so little data on the circular economy. In fact, we do not even know the circularity rate in Canada. So I was really pleased to hear that Australia had a circularity rate. But our panelists then collected whatever data we could to try to model the circularity rate in Canada. So what do we think it is? 6.1%. So at 6.1% ends up going back into the economy, 94% ends up as waste. That's a huge amount of environmental pollution, economic value lost, 94%. That's tragic. And I have to say, is less tragic than Australia, which was 3.5%. So at least, if nothing else, it's like we're bad, but there's worse. But the EU in 2017 was 11.3%. Once again, denser population with more clarity around jurisdictional governance. But the Netherlands was the best, 29.7%. And so at 30% almost versus our 6.1%, we have a long ways for improvement. But we're talking about data. And first of all, the data are imprecise. And I love Sarah's comment about the unreliability of data, but we don't even know what waste is across jurisdiction within Canada, much less across countries. Now, if we don't define what recycling is, what waste is, what circularity is, we will never be able to know if we've moved the bar. And I know that I focus on the circularity rates in Canada, Australia, EU, and the Netherlands. But let me ask you the question, what's missing? What's wrong with that? It doesn't take a whole lot of thinking to realize that we have just focused our understanding of the data on circularity and our comparison points with the developed countries. What about the developing countries? If you look at circularity in the global south, I bet you that they are much better at the circular economy than are we in the developed country. And why? Because they value natural resources, because they understand that they have to reuse the resource because there's value in that. And so I suggest that data is extremely biased in the data that we collect and the data, so the unreliability of the data. I had a conversation with someone recently, and she said even what's known as compostable differs within Canada, within the same municipality, or sorry, among different municipalities. And so what becomes compostable in terms of, the bags that you can compost is actually not compostable in most areas. So if you look at the waste stream, after months, all the food product will be composted, but the waste, the bags will remain. So I think that we need to have a better sense of what is the data that we get and what is the reliability of that data. And so we manage what we measure. And what do we measure? We measure what comes into the waste or comes into the economy, what goes out. You saw the Sankey diagram that Heinz showed. And by the way, I just have to show you that we prepared our own Sankey diagram, the same sort of thing. Okay, so we have these waste streams at a very macro level. But what we're missing, it's in there, but it's often invisible, is the way the materials are accumulating in the economy. And circularity isn't about just taking the end of pipe and putting it back in. It's about keeping material resources in use for longer. A more circular economy is actually a house that's built better, not a house that's recycled better. And yet what do we measure? We measure the recycling, and yet we're not measuring the accumulation of the stock of resources that have been built up over time. And self-reinforcing. So we manage what we measure, and we measure what we manage. And then we have these huge blind spots in circularity. So to move towards a circular transition, we need to have better data, we need to have alignment in the data and better definitions. The circular economy is coming, but in ways that are invisible. And once again, this is the innovation piece. And the data piece. But I want to say that because there's so much invisibility here, where is the circular economy coming from? In places that you don't expect. One, SMEs. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to make this very quick. SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, are where disruption is happening, not in the large corporations that we think about. And so if it's about the new ideas, the innovation, that's the invisible places, and it's happening more than we realize. It's happening in cities, and we heard this about Montreal, fantastic examples about what Montreal are doing, not in federal public policies as much, as erupting in small sectors, small regions and cities. And in innovations, it's in new products. I don't know if you've noticed, but, 1% of wood that's used is by IKEA. It's a company, and they can't reuse the wood. It's a big issue because they put glue in the wood. But where's the innovation? Is about removing the wood. but you don't measure, or sorry, moving the glue, you don't measure those innovations. And so once again, there's lots of sparks are happening around the world by SMEs within cities, and through product innovations that are often invisible. I'm going to leave with just the last point, the OECD scorecard. Once again, Sarah said, and Oriana reinforced, qualitative data is super important. Quantitative data is also needed, but we need both because there's so much we can't see. And I love the idea of roadmaps and stakeholder consultation. Think what the city of Montreal is doing, what the Australian government is doing, is absolutely fantastic. Oriana, that gives you about 4 minutes or 3.5. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tima. We have applause in the chat and already very positive feedback, but we knew it already would have been the case. So again, thanks a lot. I retain from your concluding remarks of this session, this issue of invisibility. I think this will stay with us a bit today to rethink of, yeah, Tina was right. There is a lot that we don't account in all this measurement. There might be a disparity across a geographical context. This is for sure. There might be a disparity across large and small and medium enterprises. There is a disparity between national and local government. So the circular economy is very much happening on the ground, and through this program, the Roundtable, and the work that we are carrying out at the OECD, we really want to hear from cities and their needs and how they will improve towards this transition that, as you said, does not only implies getting back waste into the system when it is possible and when a market exists to do so, but also having an understanding on how do we measure the resources that should be kept in use as much as possible. So I thank you very much for this great intervention. Thanks a lot to all the panelists for having contributed to this session on measuring circular economy progress in cities and regions. And I invite you to stay with us because we're moving now to the third and final session of the Roundtable. Perfectly on time, I have to say. So I thank very much the panelists for really being very straightforward on the messages that they wanted to share. And I also invite them to respond in the chat and in the Q&A in written, so that there will be still the conversation going on the measurement, while we transition towards session 3 on lesson learned from circular cities in action. With this concluding session, we wanted to, the idea is to highlight what cities and regions are actually doing in practice to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. And as we always do, we really want to create this platform and to this platform and opportunity to foster a city-to-city learning, showcasing different experiences. So we will hear from the city of Tallinn, Estonia. The OECD has been working with the city for over a year now, and we are very happy to have today with us the Vice Mayor on Innovation and Enterprise, Joseph Wim. Actually, the initial idea, and you saw, many of you saw the agenda, was to have the mayor among us, but you know that this is a very difficult and challenging situation for the city of Tallinn due to the current circumstances with Ukraine. So we're very happy to have Joseph with us today to contribute contribute to the roundtable. Tallinn won't be the only city that will share this experience, with us today. We have the pleasure of having back the city of Valladolid in Spain with some updates on what happened after the collaboration with the OECD and what happened in terms of implementation of the roadmap that the city of Valladolid implemented more than a year ago. And then we will hear from Brussels Capital Region that is very much involved also in our work with the city of Tallinn as a peer reviewer, as what we like to do is really to make sure that city can exchange and learn from different practices and especially from different solutions to probably common challenges. So without further ado, I'm very delighted to introduce Joseph Vim, Vice Mayor on Innovation and Enterprise at City of Tallinn in Estonia. Vice Mayor, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me start with saying that it is really important for Tallinn to be included in this OECD program, and I'm very happy to meet you all, even though it is only on the screen. We all know that when talking about transition from linear to circular economy, the question is not why, but it is how or when. The strategy Tallinn 2035 follows the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and is a social agreement on how the city developments will be directed. Tallinn 2035 sets the overall objective to become a green and a global city and has 6 interlinked strategic goals. And the strategy, together with the climate plan we have and the new waste management plan for 2022 to 26, which is almost ready for the City Council's endorsement, compose the main strategic framework for the green transition of Tallinn. And Tallinn will be the European Green Capital in 2023, so next year. As the Green Capital, we have already taken several initiatives also related to circularity. For example, we have elaborated the environmentally friendly and sustainable events guideline. We have taken the first steps towards green and circular procurements, and we are elaborating the green buildings criteria. But we aim to elaborate a more comprehensive plan for the circular transition beyond waste management. Participation in the OECD program, cooperation with the OECD experts and lighthouse cities helps us map existing challenges in different circular economy areas, such as tourism, food, waste, public procurement, built environment, digitalization, sustainability, and also identify the best solutions for our local conditions. The case study on the circular economy in Tallinn will provide us with valuable evidence-based insights and recommendations for moving from a linear economy to a circular economy. Even if we have set goals and action plans ready to be fulfilled, the world is unpredictable and suddenness may occur. If we think then, for example, no one was ready for the COVID pandemic, the COVID situation increased the use of products such as single-use masks, gloves, and certain types of packaging, and the amount of takeaway food and therefore the waste generated increased. This, on the other hand, has brought new circular economy companies on the Estonian markets who are offering customers to buy food in reusable deposit containers. Furthermore, to reduce the amount of waste the single-use masks caused, around 100 special mask bins were located in Tallinn. Single-use masks were collected, recycled, and then resulting granulated plastic was reused. Besides the COVID pandemic, Europe and also Estonia is receiving refugees from Ukraine. Estonia has received around 30,000 refugees, and they all need a place to live. They need clothes, food, and other vital items. The consumption and therefore the waste generated will increase in the near future. Circular culture is a shared responsibility between individuals, governments, and businesses, and it is all of our responsibility to raise the circular economy awareness among our old and new citizens. We all must be prepared for the lack of global resources in the future, and it is important to change our mindsets, including adopting the principles of circular economy. It is vital to buy less and reduce our overall consumption, buy more durable items, keep what we already own for longer, and give them new life by repairing or donating these items. Therefore, Tallinn is planning to create more reuse and repair centers for citizens in the coming years. And last but not least, it is very important for us to exchange information and experiences and learn from other cities and regions. To sum up, we are pleased to be part of this OECD program and are waiting for the recommendations by the OECD to move towards circular economy the most effective and productive way possible, also considering the current world situation. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much again, Vice Mayor. Thanks for finding the time to contribute to this roundtable and to share the message of how important and key is the circular economy for the city, not only in relation to the improvement that the city achieved in terms of waste management, but very much as you have highlighted in terms of managing in an efficient way resources due to incoming megatrends, including population growth and climate change, amongst others. We will now hear from Andres Aguirre, our policy analyst within the OECD unit on water governance and circular economy, in charge of the work that we are carrying out in Tallinn, Estonia, to share a little bit in details the preliminary result on the case study of Tallinn as we preliminary analyzed from the work that we are now carrying out, not only with the local team, but with a wide range of stakeholders that contributed to the first fact-finding mission in November 2021. So, Ander, I see that your slides are already on, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oriana, and thanks a lot to the Vice Mayor for the inspiring words. So I'm very happy to share these preliminary findings of the ongoing policy dialogue in Tallinn, which is one of the case studies of the OECD program on the circular economy. During my intervention, I would like just to focus on three main aspects, which are the why, the what, and the how to move towards a circular economy in Tallinn. So if we move to the next slide, starting with the why, going to the next slide, we will see that there are three main drivers for the city to move towards the circular economy. The first one is the achieving and contributing to the environmental goals. As mentioned by the Vice Mayor, the city of Tallinn set the goal to become carbon neutral by 2050, as it is established in the Climate Neutral Tallinn initiative. Here, the circular economy, which maximizes the resource efficiency, can play a key role in the achievement of this goal, considering that the material management is responsible for half of greenhouse gas emissions globally. A second driver for the city is that the expected population growth, combined with some changes in the structure of household, will require new infrastructure and also will push for new infrastructure and new services. We have seen that the population is aging in the city. So by 2045, the population older than 65 will reach 21.5% of the population, which is higher than the current level. And we have also seen that there is an increasing trend for single person households. Some studies suggest that this kind of households can consume more electricity, between 50% and 70% more, and also they consume more gas, between 40% and 50% more. So here is also an opportunity for the city. And last, the third driver for Tallinn is to contribute to creating circular jobs and to stimulate innovation. And in this particular example, considering that Tallinn is a digital leader, we have understood that digitalization can be a tool to achieve this. So if we go to the next slide, please. We have seen that recently there has been some progress obtained in Tallinn in the last 20 years in terms of having greater separate collection, and also in the reduction of landfilling, which also reduces the emission of methane pollutants. As you can see in the graphs, landfilling reduced by 80% between 2004 and 2019. Also, the separate collection of bio-waste recently more than tripled, so in the same period. And also we have seen that there was a drop in terms of the CO2 emissions, and depending on the station for the period of 2016 and 2020, these emissions dropped by 70% and 30%. And finally, we have identified several initiatives pushed by charities and also social enterprises to reduce the food waste through donation. So this is just to say that this is a driver to go beyond waste management in the city and to move towards a more holistic view in the city. So moving now to the next slide. In the what, this just refers to what Tallinn and the national government have been doing so far. And it is a very interesting moment for the country, because the government of Estonia, led by the Ministry of Environment, has been developing the circular economy strategy since 2018. And this strategy is planned to be launched by the end of this year. And in this process, the government has organized several stakeholder engagement events. They have also commissioned a study on circular economy indicators, as we saw in the previous session, the relevance of measuring progress, and also has conducted a mapping of the main actors and the main initiatives linked to the circular economy in the country. So the result of this path will be the launch of a strategy at the end of this year. So moving to the local level, to what Tallinn has been doing, as mentioned by the Vice Mayor, the city in 2021 transformed the Waste Management Department into the Circular Economy Department, which shows a great political will. Also, all these initiatives mentioned by the mayor, the city launched in 2020 the strategic document of the city, where it wanted to become a green city. Also, the climate neutral strategy and the new waste management plan, which will be launched this year, and which will include some principles linked to the circular economy, such as the reusing and waste prevention. So the result of this path, and together supported by the recommendation of the OECD at the end of this policy dialogue, will be the creation and the launch of a circular economy strategy next year in 2023, which, by the way, will be the year of the European Green Capital for the city. So moving to the next slide, in the last part of the presentation regarding the how, if we go to the next slide, we have seen in previous OECD work that if cities want to move towards circular economy, there is a need to make some drastic change in terms of regulation, production, consumption, and so on. And these are all the gaps that you can see in the slides are those gaps that we identified in a study conducted with more than 50 cities around the world. And as you can see, those gaps that are in yellow are the gaps for Tallinn. So this means that Tallinn is not an exception to this problem faced by most of the cities. So just to to summarize, we have seen that the coordination and coherence, collaboration between different municipal departments in the city could be strengthened, which sometimes result in fragmentation of initiatives. Also, we have seen that it's not always clear for the city the guidance from the national government. Sometimes we have seen that the city is more advanced in the design of the circular economy strategy, so it's not always clear for the city how to move forward. We have seen and identified several regulatory gaps. The Vice Mayor mentioned that the city is working on the green public procurement, but still we understand that the existing process doesn't fully exploit the potential of the circular economy, as the introduction of circular principles are not adequately rewarded in comparison to the price criteria. And finally, another big challenge for the city is the fragmentation of the waste management system. So the city is divided into 13 separated administrative areas. So each area works in a separate system with different stakeholders also, and so which results in a lack of economies of scale. And also another gap of the system is that the contracts for the waste provision and waste management are quite short. So this is not helping for investment and innovation from the private operations that are working in the city. So if we go to the next slide, I would like to maybe conclude my presentation with you can see here some of the suggested policy recommendations that will be further discussed with the stakeholders of the city, with more than 50 stakeholders of the city, during a dedicated policy seminar taking place by the end of the year. So these are just some preliminary ways forward for the city. And maybe I will just focus on some of them. So, for example, in terms of the newly created circular economy department, we have seen that it is still in the consolidation phase, and it is still quite focused on waste management. So it's important that this department match the name of the circular economy with new responsibility that go beyond the former waste management department. This, of course, will require adjustment in terms of skill and human resources. Moving to the facilitators, we can see that the coordination between the local and national governments should be fostered, because as we can see, sometimes there are some disconnections. So on the one hand, the national government, the Estonian government, which is quite active, could provide also some guidelines or principles to follow for the city in the design of the future strategy of the city. And on the other hand, the city could also ensure that all the relevant ministries of the Estonian government are actively taking part in the design of the new strategy of the city. And lastly, regarding the public procurement that was mentioned by the Vice Mayor, we have seen that there are still opportunities in this area. So, for example, we have seen that in the current catering public procurement processes in a school, there is no the circular principles are not adequately recognized. So, for example, the city could design some processes where could include, let's say, higher score on the purchasing decision to companies that commit, for example, to introduce circular criteria like food donation, and also to incorporate in other fields some innovative business models. For example, renting and using product as a service models. So, as you can see, there are more recommendations, but I don't think we have time to go on detail on all of them. So these recommendations will be are still preliminary and will be discussed during a policy seminar this year. and the plan and the report will be officially launched next year. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ander, for this very clear presentation. Indeed, these are preliminary findings, but they will stimulate the discussion during the policy seminar that we will carry out together with the local team in Tallinn, and then that will lead to the launch of the report in 2023, the year Tallinn has been awarded with the EU Green Capital. So thanks a lot again, and now we are moving to an old friend of the OECD program on the circular economy in cities and regions, as well as the Roundtable, Rosa Huertas, Director of the Innovation, Economic Development, Employment and Commerce Department at the City of Valladolid. And I'm also happy to welcome almost a new friend, but now not very new, because Anthony Naraningom has been accompanying us also in Tallinn, Estonia, to share his amazing experience at Brussels Capital Regions. So welcome both of you. And now I will pass the floor to Rosa Huertas. So Rosa, we published the case study of Valladolid in 2020. This case study was the result of 18 months of policy dialogue with a range of stakeholders from the public, the private, the non-for-profit sector. And the idea was to move towards a strategy for the circular economy in Valladolid. And we know that you have approved the OECD recommendation in the Council, that you have carried out a metabolism and material flow analysis, that now you have many collaborations with the universities, and we're also sharing in the chat the both the English and the Spanish version of the report. So Rosa, tell us what progress has the city of Valladolid made within the last 2 years, and what are the next steps, because the circular economy is a journey. So what are the next steps towards the transition? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity given to the city of Valladolid to take part in this new circular economy roundtable. So let me get direct to the point, since there is not much time. So in February 2020, the Valladolid case study was launched after many months working with the OECD experts and the stakeholders, and we were happy and ready to start our action plan on circular economy, having the recommendations as a starting point, but then the pandemic arrived as a tsunami. So unfortunately, we had to devote most of our efforts and resources to support the smart companies, families in such a bad situation. But it was one clear thing, or one clear challenge for us, that was not to go back in circular economy. Circular economy was an opportunity for economic growth more than ever. So we had to be able to convey and to show that. So other challenge we face in the last years is the climate emergency that is becoming more and more urgent every day. The urgent need to reduce greenhouse emissions and the role of circular economy to get this started. Also, a new framework was being set at different levels, of course, at the European level with the Green Deal and the new Circular Economy Action Plan, but also at the national level with the Spanish Circular Economy Strategy, and also the regional circular strategy here in Castilla y León. Also at local level, these last 2 years, we have been acting a lot, setting a new city strategy that is our urban agenda 2030, and also a new mobility plan, a climate strategy, and an innovation and smart city plan. So this has a aim to reach a very ambitious objective that has been set last November, that is to become a climate neutral city by 2030. So this is a very ambitious objective. So in our roadmap
toward this objective, the Circular Economy Action Plan is presented as one of the transformative projects which aligns the plan with all these European and national framework, including the National Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan. So as you see, there were a lot of pieces to put together and to align work in looking for coherence. So it was very, very important. So the context was not easy, but some factors help us to keep working hard and reinforce the awareness of the importance of circular economy and increase the presence of circular economy in the political and the socio-economic agenda. So, for example, some recognitions we get, for example, the commitment of Spanish cities to circular economy is now called the Declaration of Valladolid. It's not anymore the Seville Declaration, because now we have a new version who was signed here in Valladolid, and the leader is in Valladolid for 4 years. And also we had, well, the Climate Project Leaders Award. We were being included as a best practice in the Circular City Funding Guide published by the European Commission. So, and also it has been very important for us to reinforce our commitment and spread the networks through some initiatives like signing the Green City Accord, in which Valladolid has been responsible for the peer-to-peer learning program on circular economy, and also the Circular Cities Declaration. And also we have set different alliances for private and public collaboration, like the ECUS Hub. This is a platform of cities and companies where we think that scale is important. So it's more easier to establish together some cities and companies working all together, not just a city with companies. So this is a new way of working. So next slide, please, because now I'm going to talk about the more important result of all this effort. That is our action plan. And here I have it. So you can see this is a single document in which we put all together our approach and all the measures for the coming years. So the mission is to promote circular economy as a paradigm of a new model with economic, environmental, and social benefits, leading by example in the development of urban policies, generating conditions for its development in the productive fabric, and in citizens' responsible consumption, and facilitating, of course, the synergies between all the stakeholders. So you see what our vision is: make Valladolid a benchmark city in circular economy, considering it key to its goal of being a climate neutral city. And so you can see our principles and values. So we have 3 strategic objectives. Each one of them is concrete in different programs and in different programs. So there are a lot of them, so I have no time to go through all of them. But I think that I can set some examples regarding incorporating the circular dimension into local urban policy. So there are measures about water, about construction, about waste. Well, in the case of waste, well, we have a new concession that has been awarded for the waste treatment plant. So this is a way to finance the improvement of the facilities, but also to establish a research and development center to develop projects focused on technological challenge in the household waste sector, and a waste observatory compiling data about material flow. So what I mean is that, well, the treatment of waste is important, but also it is important to focus our efforts on prevention and minimization of waste generation, and on the recovery of waste, and of course in the digitalization. Regarding the second objective, that is promoting the circular transition of the local productive fabric, well, we have different measures regarding ideation and implementation spaces, training, mentoring, financial and technical support, networks of knowledge and practice. But, well, you know that supporting entrepreneurs and SMEs has always been at the heart of our circular economy approach, to be more productive, more competitive, and with job opportunities. So we have dealt with entrepreneurs, CEOs, directive staff, but now we have a new project through agreements with trade unions to train and encourage workers as drivers for change in the companies in a more bottom-up approach. So this is a new thing we are working on. And regarding the third strategic line, that is fostering the role of citizens as agents of change, well, what we want to get is the informed and responsible consumption. So we have implemented some measures like an interactive map of all the initiatives in the city regarding second-hand shop, upcycling workshops, collaborative economy, repair cafes, etc., in order to provide citizens with information. And also we have worked hard on raising awareness, particularly regarding their right to repair. And other important point is the work we have done with young people. Just a final remark regarding monitoring and governance in our plan. There are indicators for each activity. And I am happy to say that all stakeholders that were involved and participating in the OECD case study will be continue to be involved as a monitoring and evaluation committee of the plan, supported by a technical group made up with different departments of the City Council. So there is no other way to keep our approach as a holistic, this holistic and transversal approach in an integrated and collaborative way. So to sum up, I think that circular economy has been a key to achieve a resilient economy and to fight climate change, and that can be done from a local perspective because local government have a lot of key policies and key stakeholders. So the Valladolid objective, one of them was positioning as a reference, as a city reference. So many other cities have contacted us to learn and to work with us, and they are watching what we do in Spain, like Zaragoza, Granada, Murcia, Victoria, but also from abroad. But I think that the important thing is not Valladolid doing this. There is having a city with, is a city having a role in and a say in building a new economic paradigm. And so I think our main achievement is being the example of putting the circular economy in the local agenda and making that a pillar of the city strategy for the coming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rosa. This was a great list of actions that have been taken in only a few years, less than 2 years. Collaboration with universities, business, capacity building, development training, agreement with trade unions, right to repairs. So you name it, you really have really placed a lot of effort into the transition towards a circular economy in a way that would change the way people consume, business produce, but also public services are delivered. And this led to the point that now the Sevilla Declaration is the Valladolid Declaration. So congratulations also on this achievement, because this would represent an inspiration and an example for several cities in Spain, but also abroad, as you mentioned. So thanks again. In the chat, we have already shared the links to the different materials, but please, Rosa, feel free to share if the links to the action plan, if it is available online. And now I'm very happy to pass the floor to Anthony Naralingom. Anthony is the head of Economic Transition and Entrepreneurship Awareness Unit in the Brussels Agency for Business Support in Belgium. They have a fantastic program on the circular economy that was initiated in 2016 and that included as a priority sectors construction, resources and waste, trade, logistics, but also food. So Anthony, as a peer reviewer of the case of Tallinn and with your amazing experience on connecting cities with entrepreneurs and business, what are the main challenges that you see to move concretely into the action, so to accelerate the circular economy? And what are the good practices that you would like to share in this context from your experience within the Brussels capital region? The floor is yours, Anthony. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Oriana, for the invitation. And I would like to first say that it's really great to be in this kind of meeting, because I really think that we need more collaboration also, and to see that much energy and to see that much people involved in circular economy. It gives really a lot of sense to what we are doing, because sometimes we do a thing on our own at our regional or national level, but it's always great to see that we are not alone in this boat and everybody is thinking in the same way. So what are the challenges? Now, that being said, there is a lot of challenges, but that means also that there is a lot of opportunities. As you have already introduced it, we have developed a circular economy action plan in 2016, so quite a few years ago already. And the main objectives are strategy, which is a regional strategy. I have to maybe introduce the fact that when we talk about Brussels, most of the time people think about European Commission, but there is also a region which is an autonomous region where we have 3 important regions in Belgium. Brussels is one of the regions. And we have a government which have competencies on economy, on innovation, on environment. So that led us to be able to bring up an action plan and policies. So one of the first challenges that we meet when we wanted to create this program on circular economy was really collaboration. Collaboration is key, because we tend in a linear economy to use segmentation and fragmentation a lot in order to increase the efficiency of what we are doing. And basically what I'm saying is that what we see in the regional policy in the region is most of the time the competencies were working alone on their regional policies. So you will have an action plan or a policy on innovation, but they will not have any link with the environmental competencies of economic competencies. On circular economy, we think that it's key to have an holistic approach. Otherwise, we don't have enough collaboration and we are not complete in the answers that we want to offer. So what we have done in 2016, and it was really innovating in terms of policies, was to say that we need to work together with the competencies on economy, on innovation, on waste management, and on entrepreneurship, economy and environment together. So that's what we have done. It's really a governance aspect of the program that I will not develop too much, but that was difficult to set in, and we managed to do it at that time. The plan that we have adopted in 2016 have 111 measures. Of course, I will not develop the 111 measures, but what we wanted to do is to make sure that we have this complete approach. And we are not saying there is one solution that would fit all of the problem, but we have to adopt the right solution for the right problem. So basically, we have 4 big axes. The first axis is about governance. I think that's one of the most important, but also one of the less interesting to explain. It's how we manage this action plan, what are the indicators, and what we make sure that the resources are allocated to the right place. The second axis is really about what we call transversal measures. So basically, we have noticed that, of course, there is some specific measures needed, but there is also some, let's say, generalities in circular economies that concern every entrepreneur, like finance, regulation, innovation. And so we have a set of measures that are designed for the whole economy. And the third axis is really more about this sectors, this sectorial approach that Oriana have already developed. So basically, we have 5 sectors that we have selected for the action plan based on their contribution to the greenhouse gas emission, on their contribution to the job creation, on their contribution to the economic value creation. And that's something important because that's the objectives of our action plan. It's not a resource and waste management plan. It's not how to say it, an energy plan. It's really an economic stimulation plan that we wanted to have. So basically what we wanted to do is to make sure that we contribute to the reduction of emission, but also that we create economic value and jobs for the region. That being said, the last axis was more about the territorial approach. We noticed that in order to make an efficient circular economy in our territory, we also need the infrastructures. We also need to make sure that the cities can incorporate this inside of the way of working. So that was something really important. So first thing that I would say is really challenging in this holistic approach is collaboration. Collaboration between the public authorities, but also collaboration between public and private companies. And to do that, we have developed a lot of measures actually, because it requires a lot of different measures. But one of the most known of them is a call for projects, because what we wanted to say is that we don't have all the solution at the public authorities level. We also have to work with the companies, and companies have really great projects, and we want to be able to work together in order to achieve the goals that we set. Another measure that was really important was something that we call CRED, so Circular Regulation Deal. And with the Circular Regulation Deal, we wanted to create a platform between the public authorities and the private sectors in order to identify some problematics and to provide an answer together. So I've really this kind of dialogue installed between the private sector, and to understand what the private sector face as challenges, to understand their way of understanding the regulation, and to try to build together a solution toward this. So that's one of the challenges that we wanted to deal with, collaboration. And the other big challenges, but I think in every transition that we face, is obviously how we get the financing of this transition. And to do that, we have developed 7 different measures of financing. So it's really important for us in the region, but I think for all region, to make sure that we have like the adequate tools for financing. So not every companies, not every structures will need the same amount of financings, and not every structures will need the same structure of financing. So basically, we have the call for projects that I already speak about. We have subsidies. We have also loans for companies. We have small loans and bigger loans. We have created a fund dedicated to circular economy. So what we wanted to do is really to create something that is adequate to all the requirements. But one of the key to finance circular economy is also to drive the demand. And here, public procurement is really the right tool to show the way. And so we have worked also on public procurement to make sure that we have pilots on circular economy to show what is circular economy, because for a lot of buyers now, it's quite difficult to understand what exactly is circular economy and how we can build it. So we have developed some tools to make sure that we facilitate public procurement in circular economy in Brussels. So basically, that's two of the challenges that we have faced, but I can develop a lot more. Obviously, there is also the challenges of job creation, because we see that circular economy is more job intensive, more labor intensive, but in the same time, we tend to have like difficulties in Belgium with high labor taxes to be competitive when we have more labor intensive work. So that's something that we are dealing with. And maybe just to make a link with the experience in Tallinn, where I have the opportunity to be one of the peer reviewer. What I find challenging, but at the same time really an opportunity, as Ander have noted, is that there is a lot of harmonization that is needed on the waste management sector. And that is, of course, challenging at a short term, but that could be also a really great opportunity, because what we see in Belgium, we have a really well structured waste management sector, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult to change, but it's really interesting in a circular economy to have, at the beginning of your thinking, a more resource management aspect than waste management, because it will lead you to have like a really more interesting way of dealing with the material flows. And finally, for Tallinn, what we found really interesting also from the Brussels point of view was digitalization, and how they are really at something really interesting in terms of digital services. In Brussels, that's something that we are trying to develop, mostly on the building sector, where we want to have also a development of the building information modeling and how to create digital twins and to have like the full information on the building materials. Because as I've already been said by a previous speaker, we notice that we are lacking of data, and we need more data, and mostly, and that have already been said, and that's what we see 6 years after our experiences, is we have a lot of data now on more like the flows of materials, but we are lacking data on the stock of materials, and that's something that would be like really interesting to develop.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Anthony, for this very compelling presentation. I know you didn't have a lot of time to share all the messages that you wanted to, but your inputs are very much key also for other cities that are sort of newcomers, so initiating the transition and hearing about your tools of collaboration between public authorities and private sector through call for project, circular regulation deals, but also financing measures and fiscal tools in general can be really useful to get inspiration. And don't hesitate, please, to share in the chat any link you may deem useful for providing further information on that. And of course, so this experience as a peer reviewer within the case study of Tallinn will be also part of the OECD report in 2023. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Saskia Sassen. She doesn't need really to be presented or introduced. It's a great pleasure and honor to have her here with us today. Saskia Sassen is a Robert Lind professor of sociology and co-chair at Columbia University in New York. She studied globalization and sociology of the world's largest cities, immigration, and the global economy with a focus on inequality. Needless to say that she received plenty of awards and honors, among them 12 Doctor Honoris Causa. And in 2013, she was awarded through the Principe of Asturias Prize in Social Sciences and elected as foreign members of the Royal Academy of Sciences in the Netherlands. So we are very happy to have you here, Professor Saskia Sassen. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And we will be really delighted to hear your view about how circular cities can actually take action to accelerate this transition while taking into account economic, environmental, but also social aspects, of course, to tackle inequalities. What would be, in your view, some suggestions and for policymakers to go towards this transition and prioritize their action? Saskia Sassen, Professor, the floor is yours. You need to unmute the professor.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for that very, very generous introduction. And I have lost with how the current teams at OECD are handling things, and really they are helping us understand a variety of issues. The world has gotten to be a bit messy. In many ways, very, very powerful actors who in the past might have managed and succeeded in controlling something for good or for bad, and also on generating new modes of thinking. Nowadays, our world is far messier than that earlier period. I have been around here on this planet for a very long time, so I speak also a bit out of that. So against that context, then I find your project about combining the circular economy and social aspects, I think that is a very interesting mode to proceed. I think it will enable the opening up of a variety of settings, of modes of thinking, of modes of working, of notions of what is the ideal version that we have lived with often for a very long time. I think they will be becoming a bit unsettled, but for good reasons. We have, I think, not everybody needs to agree with that. I think we have entered a new epoch, and a new complex epoch is not an easy matter to decode or to understand. So we really, having these types of meetings where people are coming from many, many very diverse settings and diverse situations is actually extremely important in this particular period, because we are confronting a variety of very powerful conditions, including very powerful actors, for which we are not quite. And of course, what we all are very aware of, the recent elements, etc., we know that something has changed. And it's not going to be easy for us that something has changed. And the something that has changed, I think, is potentially marked by a willingness to destroy. We have already seen some of that. I hope everybody understands what I'm talking about, the situation that I'm talking about. I would rather not put in the name for a very simple reason, which is that I'm being already sufficiently persecuted whenever I talk about that. Can you hear me or not? Yeah, okay. So anyhow, so I'm just hoping that you understand what I'm talking, whom I'm alluding to. Now, coming back to some of the positives that we're seeing, though I think those negatives really matter and we need to confront them, and I will return to that at the end. But one question that we might ask is, how do we combine the circular economy and social aspects to tackle inequality? If I look at the world nowadays, I see a growth of inequalities, a growth of entities and people and families and little businesses that are losing ground, not gaining ground. we are also dealing with extraordinarily powerful actors, big enterprises who can really control increasingly what used to be situations where you would have a little shop, a little this, a little that. Now it is all being concentrated to a very large extent. One of my concerns is then really, what does it take in our current world, in this particular period, with all its rising threats, because that is what we are witnessing. We are witnessing the rise of a variety of threats for which we are not necessarily ready. These are threats of a different kind. And I'm not just thinking about the typical thing, you know, what just has been happening in the neighborhood, so to say. I'm also thinking of the vastness of destruction. We have managed, we often with many good intentions, we have managed to devastate vast areas of the world. They're dead. Water bodies that are dead, they exist as water, but it's dead water, poisoned water. So when you look at it that way, I think that entities like OECD, powerful entity when it comes to these very practical issues. And I wonder what it would mean to launch initiatives that have to do with capturing and capturing, not in a negative sense, but understanding what is really going under. What are the places in our world where small enterprises, etc., are going under? And I have been tracking quite a bit of that, and there is a lot of that. Now, I know that I'm not talking about the narrow versions of, you know, this great Congress, etc. I'm just trying to open up the field because that's the way I work. So I hope I don't offend anybody. But, you know, so how can we combine that circular economy and the social aspects that we also confront? I think that it's a challenge nowadays. In my view, I think that we have, as I said at the beginning, we have entered a new epoch. In our complex systems, it is not easy to understand what is a new epoch. It's not telling you. These are multiple mixes of elements, confrontations, little wars, emerging big wars also happening. An entity like the OECD, which is powerful, which is highly respected, which has extraordinary leadership and people, can we extend that kind of framing, which is not about war, but how can we extend it to confront some of the disastrous conditions that I'm afraid will only expand, and where we have seen
I'm afraid we can hear you, Professor. I'm not sure if it's only me. Under confirm.
No, I confirm. We can't hear.
Professor Sassen, we can hear you. Yeah, we cannot hear Professor. The mic seems to be on from our side, so there should be a bug with the mic, and probably she can't hear me either. Can we try to mute and unmute? We can hear you. No. Could you please try to unmute yourself? Apologies for this technical problem. Would you be able to use headphones? I'm so sorry, but I'm not sure that we will be able to, maybe if we try to reconnect quickly. You can hear me? We can try to disconnect and reconnect, Professor. Yeah, could you please disconnect and reconnect? We can hear you. Apologies for this technical issue. Let's see if a professor can disconnect and reconnect again. We can't do it from our side, but Professor, if you can disconnect, you can leave and then reconnect. Otherwise, we will try to deliver your speech on our platform. We can make a video and we will share it on our website in addition to the recording of the 4th roundtable on the circular economy in cities and regions. I'm not sure whether we will be able to solve this technical issue now. And yeah, we can definitely do so. So we will have, unfortunately, to close the roundtable this way. We were very much looking forward to hearing from the professor, but we still have these technical issues. So we will try to find a way. Perhaps we can record the video, as I said, and make it available on the platform. So, Professor, we will try to record the video later on, as now the time is unfortunately over after 3 hours of meeting. So I thank you very much. We will get in touch with you and we will record the video that we will will be uploaded on the web page. This brings us to the end of the roundtable. I thank you very much, all of you, for your participation, for staying with us until the very end. I would like to thank you, all the participants, all the speakers, but especially the team, Andres Aguirre, Juliette Lassman, Maria Ferrer, Lucia Moore, Dunya, Denedine, Sujin Kim, and Aziza Akmush for their incredible efforts for making this roundtable happen. We will share the recording and the main takeaways of on our website on